Mr. Peter Maurer, the President of the International Committee for the Red Cross, welcome to Al-Arabiya, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, sir. The ICRC does so much work in our area. Iraq, Syria, Yemen, South Sudan, and Libya. But what are really the main challenges that your organization face in the region?
Well, as conflicts in the region evolve, some of the challenges evolve as well. You may remember we have spoken before, and when we spoke before, one of the big challenges was getting access to people and security for our workers. Today, I would say that in Syria and Iraq, some of the big battles are over. And this, of course, changes some of the challenges. What we see today is that on the one side, we have to remain prepared for further escalations of violence. So we are still an emergency operation in the region. And at the same time, we see people returning to their homes, internally displaced in Iraq, in Syria. And these people need a different kind of humanitarian assistance to support them. So I think, to be very frank, the big challenge in the region as a whole is that you have to be prepared for everything. You have to do short-term emergency humanitarian assistance wherever combats are still taking place. We have seen in Libya recently new combats flaring up in Tripoli. We have seen at the same time a lot of attention on Idlib. So we do prepare for the emergency, and at the same time we look at the medium and long term, and we see how we can support those people now who have suffered so much over the last couple of years to bring them back to normal life. And this is different humanitarian work.
I'd like to start with Yemen. It's a huge humanitarian crisis there. More than over 20 million people are in need of humanitarian assistance, cholera threats, etc., etc. What are you doing on the ground to bring aid to the Yemeni people, to give them some relief?
Well, as you may know, we are present still in all parts of the country, in Aden, Hodeidah, Taiz, in Sana'a, in Sada. And from those different offices, the ICRC is entertaining a relief operation which is focusing first on medical assistance, supporting health center, but also water, sanitation, and waste management. All these issues belong together because, as you well know, cholera and some of the communicable diseases are intrinsically linked to the water systems, to the waste systems, to the health systems. So health is an important, health and water are important issues. We of course also have humanitarian deliveries to affected populations, displaced populations, but also to those who have been affected by the combats, and we provide them with necessary goods in services for their daily lives. And thirdly, I would say it's actually the core of our mandate. It's we are trying to expand our work in protecting people, and this has two components. First and foremost, visiting detainees on all sides of the front lines, and we have an ability since my last trip to Yemen a little bit more than a year ago. We have better access to detention facilities.
Do you have better security?
We have security is a big challenge, as you know.
Because you took about 71 staff in June.
Yes,
but now
we are bringing them back.
What happened? What changed?
Well, look, our modus operandi, our way of doing and of working in a conflict theater is that we are discussing with all the groups and groupings. And Yemen is, of course, a particular challenge because of its fragmentation.
Yeah.
And at the moment when we do have security incidents, what we normally do is quickly try to freeze our operation and to renegotiate security arrangements with all the parties. So we have intensified our work with all the actors on the ground, and I think we have reasonable security guarantees at the present moment to resume our operations. So engaging with the belligerents, trying to explain to them what humanitarian law means, what it means in terms of protection of civilian population is at the end of the day the core of our mandate, and we continue to do and deliver that.
Can you tell us and our viewers some more details about the situation in Taz?
Well, Taiz is a particularly difficult environment. We count more than 30, probably more than 40 groups on the ground, which control parts of Taiz, and which is for me kind of an emblematic situation for the challenges which we are encountering, because we have rarely in one single city such a fragmented environment. And
do you have access?
We do have reasonable access in Taiz. We have a reasonable understanding. As of recent, you know that unfortunately our one of our colleagues earlier this year in late spring has been killed in Taiz, which was at the origin of evacuating internationals from Taiz.
Yes.
We have resumed conversations with the belligerents, with all sides. And I mean, this is probably what is the most striking feature at the present moment in the Middle East as a whole. In the international press, there is always the opinion that there are two sides of a conflict. But we are talking about 30 sides of a conflict. You never know exactly who is allying with whom, and where you have to be particularly precautious in your approach. But I think we managed to do good humanitarian work despite of the challenges.
Can you tell us something about the humanitarian situation in areas where the Houthis are in control, like Sana'a and Hodeidah?
Well, in Sana'a, in Hodeidah, in Sada, we do have, of course, a difficult situation. This is a difficult situation which is resulting from the overall dependency of the Yemeni economy from import. It is a challenge because of the combat operations still going on, and even if we are also in contact with the coalition with regard to lawful combat operations, I think the challenge is still there, that this is a disrupted economy. Yes. And so we do see, to be very frank, we don't see a noticeable stark difference between Houthi-controlled and non-Houthi controlled areas of Yemen. The situation in Yemen is not good for the civilian population in all parts of Yemen, but of course it is easier, and has been easier as of recently, to have some imports in the coalition controlled, Yemeni government controlled areas, and therefore the situation is slightly more stable.
I'd like to move to Syria, which I'm sure you face different challenges, but even as difficult. And you've been there last March on a visit to Syria. Now, Idlib, God forbids, if this Turkish-Russian agreement doesn't work, is the world prepared for the nightmare scenario for humanitarian disaster in Idlib?
Well, you never can be prepared for the nightmare. I think you can reasonably prepare for a humanitarian catastrophe. I think the UN agencies, the ICRC, the Red Cross and Red Crescent organizations, we are prepared to scale up our operations, and we have taken necessary precautions. Having said that, I want to emphasize that we strongly believe that it is important not to come to the point where this escalates into a humanitarian operation, because on the ground this is a particularly difficult challenge. The intrinsic interrelatedness of civilian population and fighters, which has unfolded because of the politics of moving everybody to Idlib. Yeah. Is now something which it is difficult to imagine for me, as a president of a humanitarian organization, how you can wage a lawful war in Idlib, because a lawful war in Idlib would mean that the principle of precaution, distinction, and proportionality can be respected. And as long as the civilian population and the fighter are so intrinsically linked, it's difficult to imagine that this would not result in a very dire situation of the civilian population. So keeping the hope, I think the Turkish Russian agreement keeps the hope up, and that we can have a deconfliction which will allow the civilian populations and then humanitarian actors also to service the civilian population.
Yeah. I'd like to move to Libya. What can you tell us about the ICRC operation in Libya? You just launched an appeal on the 19th of September for more money. You said, almost $46 million. What has happened since then?
Well, Libya is somehow, strangely enough, sometimes when I look at the international press and coverage, is almost forgotten conflict.
That's true. Humanitarian-wise.
Humanitarian-wise, you see little focus, and if you see focus on Libya, the focus is almost exclusively on migrants going to Europe and not on the Libyan population.
That's true.
Our appeal clearly takes another perspective. I think Libya has, as other places in the Middle East you have alluded to, has been fragmented with different armed groups. You have combat operations still going on between the different groups. You have massive impact on the civilian population. Libya is one of those countries on the African continent which has the highest percentage of internally displaced populations. The numbers are, of course, less impressive because Libya is not a very densely populated country. But if you look at the proportion of people affected, of Libyan people affected, then this is a big operation. And ICRC has decided to focus not on the migrants first and foremost, because there are a lot of other organizations focusing on them, but to focus on the Libyans. And therefore, over the last year, we have been able to considerably scale our footprint, to engage with all the parties, to negotiate some arrangements which allow us to operate. One of the bigger operations we have undertaken over the last couple of months was in Derna, where important fighting has taken place and where ICRC and the Libyan Red Crescent Society could mount a good humanitarian operation.
The OIC and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia are arranging a meeting on Friday the 28th concerning the Rohingya. You are taking part in that meeting. What are your hopes to get out of this meeting? More help for the Rohingya, more solid plans to help them, maybe even to return them home? What are your hopes?
Well, as you know, I have myself visited Myanmar and Rakhine State a couple of weeks ago, and of course also Bangladesh, Cox's Bazar, and the other displaced populations. And we certainly hope for more generous support for those populations. At the same time, I will also highlight during that meeting that we do believe it's not only about the quantity of the response, it is also about the quality of the response. I think what struck me most when visiting Rakhine is, and talking to the population displaced to Bangladesh, is that these were all people doing life-sustaining work before the events. They had small businesses, they went to markets, they were laboring the fields, they had a livelihood.
Yes.
And this livelihood is completely destroyed, and there is no perspective of easy solution of people returning quickly. But in Bangladesh, as well as with those who have stayed in Rakhine State, we hope to have livelihood support which allows people to go back to normal lives. And I think and I hope that I can impress on the respective participants of that meeting that the humanitarian agenda needs also diligent attention. I know that the meeting is and will also advocate for accountability and for other aspects to which ICRC is not part of its key agenda, but I think it is important that we add our voice to the others about the importance of this issue and about our way of dealing with the issue.
Time has caught up with us. Mr. Peter Maurer, the President of the International Committee for the Red Cross, we thank you as always for your time and for your great work for humanity. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
God
I appreciate it.
bless. Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you.